My name is Claire, and I was 32 years old the day my sister looked me in the eye and said, "You owe this family," while I was sitting on a folding chair in an empty apartment because I couldn't make rent. I had been sending her $1,800 a month for 6 years. Not as a gift. Not as charity. As a loan, with a written agreement, with a repayment schedule, with her signature on a piece of paper I kept in a manila folder in my desk drawer. And when I called her, not to demand the whole balance, just to ask if she could send back $200 to help me cover my deposit, that's what she said. "You owe this family." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I sat there for a moment, looked at the wall, and said, "Okay." Then I hung up. There's something I had been sitting on for a while, something quiet, something documented, and that phone call was the last thing I needed to hear before I decided to use it. I want you to stay with me, because what happened 3 weeks later, in a room full of people who had all heard her version of who I was, that moment changed everything. Welcome back to Chaniel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, and if you've ever been the one who just kept giving, drop a 1 in the comments right now. I grew up in a medium-sized city in the Midwest, the kind of place where everyone at church knows your mother's name and your grandmother's maiden name and approximately how much your father paid for the house. My family wasn't wealthy. My parents both worked. My father drove a delivery route for 22 years and my mother did bookkeeping part-time for a dental office, and between the two of them, they kept the lights on and put food on the table and called it a good life. Which by most measures it was. There were two of us. Me, Claire, the older one by 4 years, and my sister Dina. People have a way of describing siblings as opposites when they want to explain a complicated relationship, and I'm going to resist that framing because it's not quite right. Dina and I weren't opposites. We just wanted different things. I was the one who got quiet when things got hard. She was the one who got loud. I saved. She spent. I planned. She improvised. For most of our childhood, these traits existed in parallel without too much friction, the way two different weather systems can share a sky for a while before one of them swallows the other. I left for college at 18 on a partial academic scholarship and worked the rest. I graduated with a degree in supply chain management, not a glamorous field, not one that gets mentioned at parties, but a practical one. I got a job at a regional logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio, doing inventory coordination, and I was good at it in the quiet way that people who are built for detail tend to be good at things. Consistently, without fanfare, in a way that only becomes visible when something goes wrong, and you realize you were the one preventing it. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment that I kept very clean. I drove a used sedan. I cooked at home most nights. I had a small investment account I contributed to every month without fail, and a separate emergency fund I treated as untouchable. Not because I was miserly. Because I had grown up watching my parents stress about money at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, and I had decided, very young, that I was not going to live like that. Dina's path was different. She moved around in her 20s, a semester of community college, a string of service industry jobs, a relationship in Nashville that ended badly, another one in Knoxville that ended worse. By the time she was 26, she was back in our hometown, renting a 2-bedroom apartment with a friend, working at a restaurant, and starting to stabilize, or so it seemed. She called me more often than she used to. We talked. We weren't close exactly, but we were getting there. Our grandmother, Nana Ruth, was the gravitational center of our family. That's the only way I know how to describe it. She was 79 at the time I'm describing, sharp as a tack, with a memory for financial detail that would have made her a formidable accountant if she'd been born in a different era. She lived alone in the house she and my grandfather had owned since 1971, a brick ranch on a corner lot with a garden she tended herself and a kitchen table where every significant family decision had been made for 40 years. She was the one who had paid for my first year of college out of her savings without telling me until I was already enrolled. She was the one who had helped my parents through a bad year when my father's route got cut back. She was the one who called me on my birthday at exactly 7:15 in the morning, every single year, without fail. Nana Ruth liked me. I don't say that with any smugness. I just say it because it's relevant. She trusted me with things she didn't trust other people with. She asked my opinion on financial decisions. She told me once, when I was about 25 and sitting with her at that kitchen table, "Claire, You are the only person in this family who understands that money is just time you stored. I wrote that down when I got home. I tell you all of this because you need to understand the baseline. You need to understand what I had built, quietly and without any help, by the time I was 26 years old. Not because I'm asking for credit, but because what came next cost me a significant portion of it, and I need you to understand the weight of that. It started reasonably. Most things do. Dina called me on a Wednesday evening in early spring. I remember it was early spring because I had just started keeping my windows open again after winter. And she sounded off. Not panicked, just flat. She told me her roommate had given notice, that she couldn't cover the full apartment on her income alone, and that she was looking at either moving into a worse situation or losing the apartment entirely. She asked if I could help her out, just for a couple of months, while she figured out her next steps. I said I would think about it. I actually did think about it. I pulled up my budget. I looked at what I was saving, what I was spending, what I could absorb without disrupting my own stability. I called her back 2 days later and said I could send her $600 a month for 3 months, and after that we would reassess. She was grateful. Genuinely, at the time, I believed that. She said thank you. She said she'd pay me back. I said we didn't need to get into that yet. Let's just get you stable. 3 months passed. She was still in the apartment. She'd picked up some extra shifts. She wasn't drowning anymore, but she wasn't swimming either. She asked if I could continue a little longer. I said yes, and I bumped the amount to $800 because her utility bills had gone up. This continued, incrementally, for about a year. The amount crept up. The temporary nature of it became less and less mentioned. And somewhere around the 14-month mark, I sat down and had an honest conversation with myself about what was actually happening. I wasn't helping my sister through a rough patch. I was subsidizing her life. And if I was going to do that, I needed it to be a loan, a real one, with documentation, because I had watched enough of my parents' financial stress to know that money without structure is the fastest way to destroy a relationship. I drafted a simple agreement. Nothing complicated. I'm not an attorney. But it was clear. It laid out the monthly amount, which at that point we agreed would be $1,800 because her rent had gone up and she'd lost a shift. It laid out a repayment schedule that didn't kick in for 2 years, to give her time. It included an interest rate of 0% because I was her sister, not a bank. And it had a line at the bottom for her signature and mine and the date. I drove down to see her on a Saturday, and I sat with her at her kitchen table, and I walked her through it. She read it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This feels really formal, Claire." And I said, "I know. I just want us both to be protected." She signed it. I kept the original in a manila folder in my desk drawer at home. I made a scan and saved it in a folder on my laptop labeled, without any drama, Dina Loan Agreement. I set up a recurring bank transfer for the first of every month, $1,800, memo line loan per agreement dated date. I told no one else in my family about the arrangement. Not my parents, not Nana Ruth. Dina asked me not to, and I honored that because I understood it. She had a complicated relationship with appearing to need help, and I respected her enough not to make it worse by broadcasting it. What I did not anticipate was what she would do with the silence. About 2 years into the loan, I started noticing a shift at family gatherings. It was subtle at first. The way my father would reference something Dina had mentioned about me, a comment about my apartment, my lifestyle, the way I kept to myself, and I could tell from the framing that the comment hadn't been flattering. The way my mother sometimes looked at me with a particular kind of measured wariness, like she was trying to decide whether to say something. The way Dina, in group settings, had a habit of making small remarks that positioned me as withholding, as someone who thought she was better than the rest of the family, as someone who kept score. I didn't confront it directly. I'm not built that way. I noted it. I filed it. And I kept sending the transfers. By year 3, I had started to understand the full shape of what was happening. Dina had constructed a version of me for our family's consumption, one in which she and I had an adversarial relationship not because she owed me money she wasn't repaying, but because I was, in her framing, jealous and controlling, and unable to be happy for her when things went well. She had apparently told our parents and at least one aunt that I had always had a problem with her independence. She had described our financial arrangement, to the extent she described it at all, as something I had imposed on her, a condition I'd put on my love. I know this because Nana Ruth told me. Nana Ruth called me one Sunday afternoon and said, in her direct way, "Claire, I want you to tell me what's going on between you and your sister, because I've been hearing things and I want to hear your side." I told her. Not everything. I kept the financial specifics to myself, but the shape of it, the distance, the remarks, the version of me that seemed to be circulating. Nana Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I see." Just that. 2 words. But the way she said them told me she had already suspected something, and that my telling her had confirmed it. She didn't take sides loudly. That wasn't her way. But she also didn't pretend she hadn't heard what I'd told her, and from that point forward, when I called, she always picked up. Meanwhile, Dina's circumstances had, from the outside, improved considerably. She'd gotten a better job, a management position at a hospitality company, and had moved into a nicer apartment, still in our hometown. She was dating someone steadily, a man named Brett, who worked in real estate. She had a newer car. She traveled occasionally. She posted these things on social media with the cheerful ease of someone whose finances were entirely in order. She was still receiving $1,800 from me every single month. I had brought up repayment once, around the 2-year mark as specified in the agreement. She said she was still getting on her feet. I said okay. I brought it up again at 3 years. She changed the subject so smoothly, I almost didn't notice she'd done it. I noticed. I said nothing. I kept detailed records. Every transfer, time-stamped. The original signed agreement. A running spreadsheet I updated every month with the date, the amount, and the running total. I did this the same way I did everything at work, methodically, without drama, because I knew that documentation was the only language that held up under pressure. By the end of year 5, the running total was over $108,000. I looked at that number sometimes and felt something go very still in my chest, not with regret exactly, but with a kind of sober clarity about what I was doing and what I might eventually need to do about it. I told myself I would give it 6 years. 6 even years. And then, regardless of what was happening, I would close the transfer and request a formal accounting. I was at 5 years and 9 months when the eviction notice arrived. The eviction notice was not, in the end, my fault, but it arrived during a period when everything felt like it was happening at once, so it felt like my fault in the way that bad things sometimes do when you're exhausted. My building had been sold to a development group that was converting the units to condos. Every tenant in the building received a notice. I had 90 days to find a new place. Under different circumstances, this would have been manageable. I had savings, I had income, I had good credit. But my company had just gone through a restructuring, and my role had been reclassified, which meant a pay reduction while they figured out the new org chart. Not catastrophic, but real. And timing matters. I looked at apartments. The rental market in Columbus had tightened. What I could comfortably afford under my previous income was now at the edge of comfortable under my new income. I was doing math constantly, in the morning, at lunch, in the half hour before sleep. Whittling things down, figuring out what I could and couldn't absorb. The deposit on the apartment I found, a decent 1-bedroom in a quieter part of the city, a place I actually felt okay about, was $2,200. I had it, technically, but it would leave my emergency fund uncomfortably thin during the gap between deposits. I ran the numbers 3 different ways. I kept coming back to the same conclusion. If Dina could return just $200 of what she owed me, $200 out of $129,600, it would make the transition measurably less stressful. I called her on a Thursday evening. She picked up on the 3rd ring and sounded distracted, like I'd caught her mid-something. I told her what was happening with the building, the deposit, the timing. I told her I wasn't asking for anything major, just $200, whenever she could manage it in the next few weeks. The silence on the line lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Claire, I don't think you understand how much stress I've been dealing with." I said I was sorry to hear that, and I repeated the request. She said, "We talked about the repayment thing already. Things are complicated right now." I said I understood, and I noted that the agreement had put the repayment window at 2 years, and we were now at nearly 6. The quality of her voice changed. It got flatter, more deliberate, the way someone's voice gets when they've decided to stop managing a conversation and just end it. She said, "You've always acted like helping this family was some kind of sacrifice. Like we're supposed to be grateful every time you do the bare minimum. You moved away, you built your little life, and the one time any of us actually needed you, you showed up with conditions. So no, I'm not sending you $200. And honestly, you owe this family a lot more than you've ever given." I sat on the folding chair in my half-packed apartment and looked at the wall. Something in my throat tightened so hard I couldn't speak for a moment. Not with sadness. With a kind of crystalline recognition. I had, on some level, been waiting for this exact sentence for 5 years and 9 months. I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay?" I said, "Okay." I just needed to hear that. She said I was being weird, and then we hung up. I sat in the empty apartment for maybe 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Dina Loan Agreement, opened the spreadsheet, and looked at the running total one more time. $129,600. 72 transfers. Every single one documented. I picked up my phone and called my bank. Block 5, arrival at the public event / the freeze beat. Here's what I need to explain before I get to what happened. Nana Ruth had a birthday every year that was, in our family, treated as something close to a civic event. She turned 80 that spring, and the gathering she'd agreed to let the family throw for her was not a small thing. It was held at the community room of her church, a space that fit about 60 people, and it drew not just immediate family but neighbors, former colleagues of my grandfather's, members of her garden club, people who had known her for 40 and 50 years. It was the kind of event where people showed up with framed photographs and handwritten notes and casseroles, because that is the kind of woman Nana Ruth was. My parents had been planning it for months. My mother had made a spreadsheet. There was a catering order and a flower arrangement, and a slideshow somebody's kid had put together with old photographs. It was, by every measure, a production. I had been helping with the logistics from Columbus, coordinating the rental agreement for the community room, handling a few of the vendor payments, sending reminders to extended family. I was, in other words, embedded in the planning in the quiet, functional way that I'm embedded in most things, doing the work that keeps everything running, not in a way anyone would have thought to acknowledge. Dina was also involved. She had, from what I could tell, contributed primarily by making suggestions. The party was on a Saturday afternoon in late April. I drove down Friday night and stayed at Nana Ruth's house, which is what I always did when I came home. We had tea at the kitchen table, and she asked me how things were going, and I told her, in general terms, that I had made some decisions about a situation that had been weighing on me for a while. She looked at me for a long moment with those steady brown eyes and said, "About time?" I didn't ask what she meant. The Saturday of the party arrived clear and warm, the kind of late April day that feels like the season is trying to make a good impression. I dressed conservatively, did my hair simply, drove to the church, and helped set up for 2 hours before guests started arriving. By the time the room filled up, there were probably 55 people inside. Neighbors I recognized from childhood. My parents' friends. Dina, who arrived with Brett and was wearing a sundress and working the room with the ease of someone who is very comfortable being looked at. My Aunt Patricia and her husband. Several of Nana Ruth's garden club women in their best cardigans. And, seated near the window at a small table slightly apart from the main gathering, a man I recognized from the bank. His name was Mr. Aldridge. He was the manager at the branch where I held my accounts, a quiet, deliberate man in his late 50s with reading glasses and a leather portfolio. He was also, I should tell you, a member of Nana Ruth's church and had been for over 20 years. She had called him herself the previous week to invite him. She had not told me she was doing this. I saw him when I came in with a tray of centerpiece arrangements. He caught my eye across the room, gave a small nod, and opened his portfolio on the table in front of him. Something in my sternum went very quiet when I saw him. Dina saw him too. I could tell by the way her eyes landed on him and then moved away quickly, the social calculation you can almost watch someone perform. She didn't know who he was. He was just an older man near a window with a folder. The formal part of the gathering happened about an hour in toasts, the slideshow, a few short speeches. My father spoke. One of Nana Ruth's garden club friends spoke. I said a few words about the kitchen table and what it had meant in my life, and I meant all of it. Then Nana Ruth stood up. She thanked everyone by name, with the specificity of a woman who had been paying attention to the people in her life for 80 years. She thanked the family. She thanked the neighbors. She thanked Mr. Aldridge for coming, which made a few people glance over at him with mild curiosity. Then she said, calmly and without ceremony, "Before we cut the cake, I've asked someone to share some information that I think the family needs to have. I believe in honesty at the table. It's the only thing that holds a family together long-term." The room got that particular quality of silence that happens when 60 people all decide simultaneously to pay closer attention. Mr. Aldridge stood up. He introduced himself simply, his name, his title, his branch location. He said that he was there at the request of Nana Ruth, who was a long-time member of this church and whom he had known for many years, and that he was there in his capacity as a document custodian and account manager, not as a guest speaker, and that he would be brief. He opened the portfolio. He said that he had been asked to bring printed records associated with a specific account. He read the last 4 digits, and that he wanted to make sure the family had a complete and accurate picture of certain financial arrangements, because it had come to his attention, through the account holder, that there was some confusion about the nature of those arrangements. He said the account had been open for 6 years. He said the account had received 72 identical monthly transfers of $1,800 each from an external account held in the name of Claire. He said my last name. He said the total of those transfers was $129,600. He said that the transfers had been made pursuant to a signed loan agreement, a copy of which he was prepared to share, and that the account had been formally closed by the account holder, not Claire, but the other party, on no date, because it hadn't been closed by the other party at all. The account was still open, still holding the most recent balance, because no repayment had ever been initiated. He paused. Then he said, "What I can confirm is that, as of this week, the originating account, Ms. Claire's account, has had the recurring transfer canceled, by Ms. Claire's request. The loan balance of $129,600 remains outstanding." He closed the portfolio. He sat down. I was standing near the back of the room, next to the table with the centerpiece arrangements I had helped set up that morning, and I did not look at Dina. I looked at Nana Ruth, who was looking at the tablecloth in front of her with a composed expression of someone who has done something they believe was necessary and are at peace with it. I looked at my parents. My mother's hand had gone to her mouth. My father had gone very still, the way men of a certain generation go still when they are trying to process information, that is, reorganizing their understanding of something they thought they already knew. His jaw was set, and he was staring at a point on the wall somewhere past Dina's head. I looked at my Aunt Patricia, who had turned slowly in her chair to look at Dina. And then, because I needed to understand what a certain expression felt like before I could describe it to you, I looked at Dina. She had gone the color of old paper. Her shoulders had pulled up toward her ears in the particular way that bodies do when they are trying to make themselves smaller, without acknowledging they are trying to make themselves smaller. Brett had taken a half step back, not dramatically, just the instinctive spatial adjustment of someone recalibrating their proximity to something difficult. Her mouth was partially open, and she was staring at Mr. Aldridge's portfolio as though she expected it to do something. The garden club women, to their eternal credit, did not whisper. They simply looked at their hands with the dignified stillness of people who have seen enough of life to recognize a private matter becoming public without needing to narrate it. One of my mother's friends said, very quietly to no one in particular, 6 years? My father stood up. Not dramatically. He just stood up, the way he used to stand up from the kitchen table when a conversation required him to be vertical. He looked at Dina. He did not speak. Dina said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady, "This isn't. I was going to pay it back. There was a plan we talked about." My father said, "Who's we?" She stopped. Nana Ruth said, gently but without softness, "There's cake. Let's let people get cake." The room moved, the way rooms do when they've been given permission to decompress. People stood. Someone went to the cake table. The garden club women began talking among themselves in the specific tones of people who are processing but are too well-mannered to process loudly. I walked to the window. I stood there for a moment looking at the parking lot, the clear April afternoon, the ordinary Saturday outside. My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. Something had settled, not landed with a crash, but settled, the way a thing does when it finally occupies the space it was always supposed to occupy. Nana Ruth came and stood beside me. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You should have cake. You set up those centerpieces, and you deserve cake." I said, "You didn't tell me you'd invited him." She said, "You would have talked me out of it." She was right. I would have. I got a piece of cake. The drive home that evening was quiet in the way that drives are quiet after something that has used up all the available language. My phone started within the hour. Not Dina first, my mother. She called from the car, which meant my parents were already on the road back home, and she had clearly decided she wasn't going to wait until they got there. I picked up. She asked me, in the careful voice of someone trying to be fair, why I hadn't told her. I said I had wanted to tell her, but that Dina had asked me to keep the arrangement private, and that I had honored that. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your father wants to know how long he would have gone on thinking you were the difficult one." I said I didn't know. She said she'd call me tomorrow. My father called 10 minutes after she hung up. He's not a man of many words on the phone, my father, but he said, "I owe you an apology for some things I said at Christmas." I said he didn't have to. He said he wanted to. We left it there. Dina called at 11:47 that night. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 12:15. Voicemail. She sent a text at 12:30 that said we needed to talk, that things had been taken out of context, that Mr. Aldridge had presented information without explaining the full situation. I read it once and put my phone face down on the counter. She called again the next morning. And the morning after that. The shape of Dina's calls shifted over the following 2 weeks in a way I had watched coming from a distance for a long time. The first calls were defensive, context, misunderstanding, partial information. The second wave was explanatory, things had been hard. She'd been planning to bring it up, the timing had never been right. The third wave, which started about 10 days in, was something closer to genuine, shorter messages, less argument, more of a quality I can only describe as reckoning. Brett, I was told by a cousin, had asked her some direct questions about the loan that she apparently hadn't been able to answer in a way that satisfied him. I don't know more than that, and I didn't ask. My Aunt Patricia, who had always been closer to Dina than to me, sent me a card in the mail. An actual card, handwritten. It said she was sorry she had believed a version of me that wasn't fair to me, and that she hoped I knew my family loved me even when they weren't doing a very good job of showing it. I kept the card. I put it on my refrigerator. My parents, in the weeks after, began calling me more. Not with drama, not with long debriefs of what had happened, just more frequently. My mother started sending me recipes she'd found, which is her specific love language. My father started asking about my job in the detailed way he used to ask when I was first starting out. The quality of those calls was different from what it had been, lighter, more direct, like a window had been opened in a room that had been shut for too long. The loan itself remained outstanding. I had no immediate plans to pursue it through any formal channel, not because I didn't have the documentation, but because I had thought carefully about what I actually wanted from the situation, and what I wanted was not to spend the next 2 years in a legal process. What I wanted was for the truth to be known. That had happened. I had closed the recurring transfer. I had the signed agreement in my desk drawer. Where it went from there was up to Dina and up to time. 2 months after the party, Dina sent a cashier's check for $3,000 and a note that said she was going to start repaying what she owed. The note was short. It didn't have an apology in it exactly, but it had something adjacent to one. A line that said she'd been carrying something she shouldn't have been carrying the way she'd been carrying it, and that she knew that. I deposited the check. I updated the spreadsheet. I sent her a text that said, "Received. Thank you." She replied with a thumbs up. That's not a storybook ending. I know that. It's just the actual one. Here is what I learned from 6 years of transfers and one afternoon in a church community room. Silence is not the same as peace. I kept the arrangement quiet because Dina asked me to, and I told myself it was respect for her privacy. But silence also let a false version of me circulate for years in a family I cared about. Quiet people often confuse not speaking with not being heard. Those are two very different conditions. Documentation doesn't replace conversation, but when conversation keeps failing, documentation is the thing that holds the shape of the truth until the room is finally ready for it. I don't know what Dina and I are now. Not close, not estranged, somewhere in the careful middle distance that can sometimes, slowly, become something more. What I know is that I kept my word. I had an agreement, and I honored it. I kept records because records are what you have when memory gets convenient. And when the moment came, not because I manufactured it, but because Nana Ruth, who had known the shape of her family for 80 years, decided it was time, I let the ledger speak. Not me. The ledger. That's my story. A manila folder, a recurring transfer, and a bank manager who showed up to a birthday party with a portfolio. Now I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Have you ever quietly supported someone in your family, financially, practically, emotionally, while they told everyone else a different story about you? What did you do? Did you say something, or did you wait? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.